We're in Hebrews chapter 12, and we will begin where we left off last week, but just to bring us up to speed. Hebrews chapter 12, of course, we have the example of Christ. We also have, beginning in verse 5, that of the things, the exhortation that they have forgotten, which comes from Proverbs chapter 3, 11 and 12, concerning chastisement, concerning that of rebuke and correction from God. Then we come to verse 7, and it's basically on the principle of discipline and the fact of what discipline is meant to do, what its intent is, and that it's not a foreign concept to any of us, because our parents have to discipline children, and God has to discipline us, and that there is an intent by it. Then we come to a part of preparing for difficulties. Well, the fact is that if we're not disciplined, and if we are not growing spiritually, when it comes to problems, when it comes to difficulties, it's going to be very difficult. And the likelihood of failure is going to be higher. Now, anybody can decide how they're going to respond to difficulties. Anybody can decide, and it can surprise you as to how people will respond. But the stronger you are, the more likely you will be to continue to be faithful. And the weaker you are, the more likely it will be that you will fail, that you will fall to whatever the difficulties are and leave the faith, or backslide, or begin to wither away. And let's just begin in verse 12. Here is the idea of strengthening ourselves, and it is comparing us spiritually to the human body. Therefore, strengthen the hands which hang down and the feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. This is a spiritual message. It is a message concerning doctrine. Those straight paths, that's a message concerning doctrine. This is, as we made mention last week, this is not a way of healing yourself physically. This is the way of healing yourself spiritually. Those straight paths, that is the doctrine of Christ. And he's going to get into this later concerning doctrine, and that we must always have the doctrine, the pure doctrine, which comes from Christ. All right? What's lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. Now we have pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. So there is always pursuing peace with all, or all people. We are to pursue holiness. So this is a constant battle, a constant action. This is what God expects us to do always, not just a one-time action, one-time event, and you're good. This is something that's always necessary. Pursuing peace with all, pursuing holiness. Okay, so we come to this part, and we're getting to where we ended off last week. Looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. All right, we must look carefully, and that we can fall short of the grace of God. Hebrews is telling us this. This is obviously a teaching of the Bible, that one can in fact fall away from God, and that this is something that is that can definitely be done by anyone, of falling from the grace of God. We go to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. We can be confident that we stand. But Paul, writing in 1 Corinthians, says, you better take heed. That means make sure you're actually standing. And it's not a matter of just confidence. It's not a matter of just, I feel comfortable. It's not a matter of that somehow we've been fooled. And as one man said, and it is true, the denominations exist to make people feel comfortable, to make them feel like they are where they're supposed to be. And it is a ruse by Satan. That denominations are there to make people feel like they are serving God, that they are in His church, to make them feel just that sense of spirituality, that sense of goodness, and they're not where they're supposed to be. Not at all. And there would be many in the religious world who think they stand. There would be those in the church who think they stand. Because that's precisely what who's Paul writing to in 1 Corinthians? Who's he writing to? He's writing to the church in Corinth, and they have many, many problems. And of course, he's addressing those one by one through the book of 1 Corinthians. So we come back to Hebrews chapter 12, and we just read our verse again. Looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. Now we put this into context of what has been just discussed, and that is faith under pressure, and also chastisement and difficulties and trials. What type of man would Job have been without the trials he went through? Okay? Now, he was righteous to begin with, but he is blessed even further on the other side. Would he have preferred to avoid it? Everyone would have preferred to avoid it. But he is stronger on the other side. And others, through their difficulties, and this is, once again, this is not a foreign concept at all. We see this all the time, and I do mean all the time, of where people develop, and we expect them to develop, but they don't develop by way of ease, or not in a positive way, develop by way of allowed to just behave however they want to. They're not developing in a positive way. People who develop in positive ways, they have in fact taken the difficulties, they've done the difficult things, mostly because it is thrust upon them that they do the difficult things, and they come out of it a better person. But, you can take two people and put them in the same situation. One grows by it and the other does not. One says, I'm in a bad situation here. I'm in the bad situation. And begin to list how bad it is. And then say to him or herself, but I'm okay. I can do this. I can survive this. And even if I don't, okay, that's okay too. But all is well. I can continue in this. The other person being able to, just like the first one, list how bad this is. It's A, B, C, D, just be able to list them all, and then come away with that root of bitterness. That root of bitterness. And it can take hold, and then what does it say? And by this many become defiled. There's this springing up, this bitterness springs up and it causes trouble, and then you become defiled by it. Just leaving God, leaving His church, leaving Christ, leaving it all behind, because you didn't grow in the proper direction. You didn't grow, and as has, it's the old illustration, and today would be a very good day to do it. You go to the parking lot, you put a block of wax on the pavement, you put a block of wet clay on the pavement, and you come back later today and see what you got. It's the same sun, same day, same heat, same everything, but the wax has melted on the parking lot and the clay has hardened. Old illustration, but it is true. And it all has to do with the human heart. Now, someone who has a heart that is hardened, well, you can change that. You know, we're not unchangeable. We're not unflexible. We can change ourselves. We can will ourselves to be a different way, having a different attitude. Now, we want to read verse 15 before we get to verse 16, but looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. All this has to do with the potential of failure, and what happens in failure. In verse 16, lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. Now, this is the second time Esau has actually been put in here. He was mentioned in Hebrews 11:12, but not because of his faith. He's not there because of his faith at all. But here he's brought in as an example of someone who there's a springing trouble. And why is there trouble? Because he, in fact, despised his birthright. He despised his birthright. He sold his birthright for one morsel of food. But let's look at what it says. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau. So, I have no evidence that Esau was a fornicator. I have no evidence of that. But I do have evidence that he was a profane person. The fact that he was willing to do what he did proves that he didn't care about anything that of any value, anything that had any worth to him. His birthright was sellable. Now, someone who understood what that birthright was and had an appreciation for it would never have done it. And certainly Jacob never sold it to anyone else or sold it back to Esau. That here is this profane person like Esau. Well, let's just read it. Fornicator or profane person like Esau. He sold his birthright for one morsel of food. Verse 17, for you know that afterward, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected. For he found no place for repentance, though he sought it diligently with tears. Now, Genesis 25, he sells his birthright, just as a matter of course. I am starving. And what good is my birthright if I'm going to die from starvation? All right, what good is that? And I think we can know from the context that, yeah, he was hungry, and yeah, he was probably starving, but no, he wasn't about to die, that he could have done something else and without selling his birthright. Okay, so he willingly, I think he is someone that is materialistic only. I think that's very clear as to what he was. Materialistic only. Extremely, I hesitate to use the word practical, but I just have to use the word materialistic, in that he'll just seek the whatever he needs to do right now, and whatever the cost may be. That's what he's going to do. That's what he's going to do for the sake of being fed in this instance, for the sake of trying to alleviate being hungry. He's willing to do it. Now, when we get to Genesis 27, we see where he cannot receive that birthright. It's gone. And notice, we're going to read it again. For you know that afterward, after Esau sold his birthright, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected. It's gone. You sold it. It's gone. for he found no place for repentance. Could he be sorry for what he did? And the answer is yes. He could be sorry for what he did, and knowing it was the wrong thing to do. Obviously, he found out now. He lived to see this day. He lived to see this day, but he threw all that away, and he can't get it back. There are some things you can never get back. There are some things you have every right to have. Every right. But you can toss that away. You have the right to live. You have that right. But you can throw it away. We have capital punishment going all the way back to Genesis chapter 9 being spoken of as a command. And capital punishment again seen by way of the law of Moses and the way a nation is to be handled and law is to, and justice is to be handled. There are certain things that are capital punishment. There's a capital punishment that is a result. That's a punishment. All right? You have every right to live until you toss away that right. And you can. We can do that. And that someone also, it's a different set of circumstances, but also can lose their right to be married. We can lose that right, and Jesus speaks of that in numerous places, several places where Jesus spells that out. That including the Sermon on the Mount, that there are things that we can just toss away that right. Well, how so? Well, I guess we need to, since we've brought it up, we need to address it. So we go to Matthew chapter 5, and we go to verse 31. Matthew 5, verse 31. Furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. Okay, so that's you've heard it. It's been said. All right, that was a thing from the past. That's the Old Testament. And in the Sermon on the Mount, he is giving, these are the things that have been, but these are the things, this is the way it's going to be. Well, how does he have the right to do that? Because it's going to be, we're now under the law of Christ. The old covenant is going to be fulfilled, come to its end, come to its conclusion, and then the law of Christ is going to be enforced. But I say to you, verse 32, but I say to you, whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Well, that is from someone who they, in this instance, someone who is, in marriage, there is only one legitimate reason for divorce in marriage. Jesus only gives one legitimate reason, and that is adultery. Then the innocent party can divorce the guilty party. The innocent party has done what Christ permits in this. I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality, that's adultery. Okay, so he allows for that, but he does not allow for someone to divorce for just any reason whatsoever. None whatsoever. Marriage is firm, and marriage is a right that we're born with. In time, you can have the right, you have the right to be married in time. But if you can destroy that right as the fornicator or a profane person like Esau, that as we can forego, just toss that right away by just divorcing for any reason whatsoever. And we might as well stay with this just for a second to make clarifications. Okay, what if he happens to be in prison? You're still married to him. That's the way it is. I mean, just if Jesus did not give this one and distinct clarification, this one and distinct reason, then if he allowed for other things, then people could just begin to make stuff up. All right? He's in prison. Okay, that's rough. But that doesn't give you the right to divorce him. He is a abuser of drugs. That doesn't give you the right to divorce him. That gives you the right to help him. It does give you that right, but not to divorce him. Or she is impossible to live with. Okay? You're the one that married her. All right? You're the one you have made that covenant. You and her and God. No one forced you to do that. Better for worse. This is the way it is. And there's going to be hardships. And some people are going to create their own hardships. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that at all. Now, there's more that we can look at in Matthew chapter 19. Let's just go there. Matthew chapter 19. Because Jesus says this more than once. And in the New Testament, it's more than once. Verse 5. Let's just begin in verse 4. And he answered and said to them, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? He's confirming Genesis chapters 1 and 2 and the 7 days of creation. And said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let not man separate. Then they said to him, why then did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away? Good question. And he said to them, Moses, because the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. What Moses did is not going to be enforced anymore. What Moses did is not going to be legitimate anymore. Once he dies, the new covenant comes in, his testament comes in, and then what was with Moses is done away. But he says that wasn't so prior to Moses. What Moses did, that wasn't so before that point. Verse 9, and I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. Okay, so that means and this may sound odd to some people, but this is what he's saying. For a man to divorce his wife didn't commit adultery against him. His wife is an innocent party concerning that. But he divorced her nonetheless. And he goes and he marries someone else. That's an adulterous relationship that he just entered into. That's an adulterous relationship. Meaning he had no right to marry anyone else. He had no right. Because he destroyed the tightest, the most binding agreement between two people on this earth, and it is marriage. And one can destroy that by committing adultery or by divorcing your spouse who did not commit adultery. You can now forego that right. And though you can repent of it, it cannot be. He was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought diligently with tears. That there are certain things that once they're gone, they're gone. And God expects certain things to be seen as extremely important, and to learn the lesson of marriage before you get involved in it. It's like a lady that I knew, she was on her fourth husband, and we were discussing this. She didn't have a right to be rid of her first husband. She's on her fourth husband, and I was trying to tell her that God is trying to let us know that marriage is a serious matter. When you enter into it, it is for life. It is an absolute commitment to that person. Whatever that person does after that, if they're innocent of adultery, whatever that person does, you're still married to that person, and you have no right to divorce. Now it goes to death in that. But and God knows that with adultery, so much has been destroyed, so much trust, that there's extraordinary emotions that are just destroyed, and it destroys homes. It is a poison, and with that, He allows for divorce. He allows for it. The guilty party can no longer marry again. And her response in this was, I've learned that lesson now. Well, God doesn't want you to learn it on your fourth husband. He wants you to know it before you have your first husband. He wants you to know that. You just cannot dispose of husbands until you decide you finally learned it. It is truly a commitment, and God means it when He says it. Okay? And so we can fall short of the grace of God by this, because it's all linked together in this potential for failure. It's all linked with this. And it doesn't matter concerning repentance. Yeah, one can return back to God. There's no doubt about that. But there are certain things that you cannot gain again. Just like with Esau losing his birthright, there are certain things you cannot gain again, though you seek it diligently with tears. Now, we come to this next section, verse 18. So Hebrews 12, verse 18. This is one of those negative statements that's then followed by a positive statement. We've talked about this as being a style in the book of Hebrews. And there's several things that one can point out as matters of style in this that are unique. But here is this one style of starting with a negative, or having a negative and positive statement. They can go back and forth, it doesn't matter. But, for you have not, that's a negative statement, for you have not come to the mountain that may be touched and that burn with fire, into blackness and darkness and tempest. Okay, so this is Mount Sinai. This is Exodus 19. You have not come to that mountain. That's in the past. That's a shadow of the real mountain. That's a shadow of something far greater. As great as Mount Sinai was, with the presence of God on it and surrounding it, the thundering and the lightning, and it was extremely scary. Even Moses is frightened by it. Okay, so you haven't come to that mountain. You haven't come to that mountain at all. And he continues on, and the sound of a trumpet and the voice of words. Now, this is going to be applied later in chapter 13. It's going to be applied later. But this voice of words, this voice of God, listening to Him. So we have the sound of a trumpet and the voice of words, so that those who heard it begged that the word should not be spoken to them anymore. All right, that's Exodus 20, verses 18 and 19. This is a frightening place. They don't want to hear the voice. They don't want to hear that. This is a frightening place to be. And we've got later this encouragement and exhortation to listen to that voice. Listen to the voice. Because the voice has words that we must hear. Now, in this next verse, verse 21. We'll get to there in a second. For verse 20, for they could not endure what was commanded, and if so much as a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot with an arrow. So that's Exodus 19, 12, and 13. Okay, so they could not endure what was commanded. This place is extremely holy. and no one is to touch that mountain. Even if an animal were to touch it, that one of their animals, then that animal was to be shot with an arrow, or it was to be killed, be stoned or shot with an arrow. Well, why would you shoot it with an arrow? To keep from touching the mountain is obviously why. But that beast is to be killed, and they would also be killed if they touched that mountain. Now, this is very different from Moses, Exodus chapter 3, and the burning bush. God tells him, take off your sandals. You're on holy ground. All right. But there is no idea there of death for being here. There's no idea for that. And of course, with Moses is going to be the one going up that mountain. He's going to be going. And of course, concerning the burning bush, Moses wasn't about to touch the flame in that. But concerning all this is no one was to touch that mountain. And I think they were so fearful, there's no way they were going to. They were so fearful of everything about that, everything that was going on there, that they weren't about, that they didn't even want to hear what was going on. Now, verse 21 is unique and has caused a problem for some people and for some commentators, and I don't know why. I don't know why at all. And so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I am exceedingly afraid and trembling. Okay, now we can go to Exodus 19 and verse 16. All the people who were in the camp trembled. We could say, okay, that includes Moses. But there, Moses doesn't say in Exodus, I'm exceedingly afraid and trembling. Now, some commentators will go to Deuteronomy 9 and 19 or even 4 and 12. But 9 and 19, for I was afraid of the anger and hot displeasure with which the Lord was angry to destroy you. Deuteronomy 4:12, and the Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of the words, but saw no form. You only heard a voice. I'm sorry, that goes up to the voice of words. That voice. Okay, sorry. Deuteronomy 4:12. That goes to verse 19, that voice of words. But going back to Deuteronomy 9:19, Moses said, I was afraid of the anger and the hot displeasure of God. All right, but that's after all this was done. Actually, that's after he returned from Mount Sinai and you have the worshiping of the golden calf. He was afraid of God destroying them for doing that, and he would have. All right, he was afraid of that happening. And so this is really for different reasons. That Moses saying, I am exceedingly afraid and trembling, all right, that wouldn't apply to Deuteronomy 9:19 because Hebrews 12:21, that is from the base of Mount Sinai with all the thunderings and the voice and all the commands and all that. So what does this mean? It's not a problem. It's not a problem at all. When did Moses say this? Well, he would have said it at the same time that we have Exodus 20 and Exodus 19. All this would have been around that time, and this is just new information that we don't have from Exodus. That's all. Same Holy Spirit is guiding the writer, guiding Moses to write the books of Exodus and the writer of Hebrews to write the book of Hebrews. It's just new information. And this is nothing new because that's done in the text all the time of where we have an event being recorded in one book, and then we have in another book speaking of those things, but something else being said about it from another angle, giving a little bit more information that you didn't get earlier. The Gospels do that. We also have going from 1 Samuel all the way to 2 Chronicles. We have things being spoken of the kings that in one book didn't give that information, but another book did give the information. And does this mean anything that changes our idea of the book of Hebrews? No, not at all. It's just that Moses evidently said this even when Exodus doesn't tell us that he did. It's new information. Just like in the book of Jude, we find out concerning what happened immediately after Moses died that we don't get from the book of Deuteronomy or the book of Joshua, because those writers aren't given that information, but Jude is. Now, let's go to verse 22. Here's the positive. Going back to verse 18, 18 is the negative. You have not. Now verse 22, but you have come to Mount Zion. All right, this is not Mount Sinai. This is Mount Zion. You have come here. You have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels. Here is a better mountain, a greater mountain, a more impressive mountain, and might I add, a more fearful place. If Sinai was to be feared, is this not also to be feared as well? Yes. And more so. But notice the hope that's in this. It's not just a scary place. If you are against God, this is a scary place. If you are with God, this is a place where you're still to have that respect and fear of Him as who He is, and holding Him and everything about it as holy and with great reverence. With great reverence. But here's this city of the living God. That's His city. The heavenly Jerusalem. It already exists. The heavenly Jerusalem already exists. When John sees it in the book of Revelation, all right, it's already been mentioned here in the book of Hebrews. It's already been mentioned, and by that name. Here is this heavenly Jerusalem, and in it are an innumerable company of angels. And, okay, I would have to say that with this statement is not in vision form, as Revelation is. That this statement, we can just take it as exact. It is cut and dry. It is saying what it means. There's no hyperbole. It's not apocalyptic literature. There's no imagery involved in this. It is known as the city of the living God. It is known as heavenly Jerusalem, not literal Jerusalem. Literal Jerusalem will be destroyed with the rest of this world. But this is heavenly Jerusalem, and using the shadow of the Old Testament as an illustration to what is now, making by way of comparison. And this innumerable company of angels, well, if we read the book of Revelation, I think Revelation more than any other book, that it shows the vast number of angels that exists. And I don't think that's hyperbole, especially when I look at places like this. The Jehovah Lord of Hosts. Well, what does hosts mean? That means armies. And of course, you can't get an idea how big that is. But here he's saying an innumerable company. So it's beyond our ability to number, is a lot of angels. a lot of angels that are there. And I have no reason to hold this as being anything other than literal. I have no reason to. Because Sinai was literal, and here is this Mount Zion, but he's clarifying, city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. Here is the heavenly, not the earthly. The heavenly. Using imagery, yes, but using it as a direct comparison, using it also to prove a point. And what's the point? There's a greater mountain that we have come to. Now, to verse 23, to the general assembly. Well, assembly, that is, that the word church means the called out to assemble. That's what the church means. And this general assembly is everyone who has been called out. To the general assembly and church of the firstborn, who are registered in heaven, to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of men, to the spirits of just men made perfect. So here, what is this Mount Zion? City of the living God, heavenly Jerusalem. Inside are innumerable company of angels, but the general assembly, church of the firstborn, who are in it. Here, those who have registered in heaven to God, and the spirits of just men made perfect. They've been made perfect how? By the sacrifice of Christ. That's how they're made perfect. No other way. Verse 24, to Jesus, the mediator of the new company, to the new covenant, and Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel. Okay, so there's a lot of things concerning this mountain. There's a lot of things that are spoken of here. We just fill out this whole list. City of the living God, heavenly Jerusalem, general assembly, church of the firstborn, to Jesus the mediator of the new covenant, to the blood of sprinkling. That speaks better things than that of Abel, speaks better things than anything else. Speaks far greater things. Now, verse 25. Verse 25. I'm sorry, when I was back in verse 19, I said it was in chapter 13. It's not, it's here. See that you do not refuse him who speaks. Do not refuse him who speaks. That's the voice of words. The voice of words that is addressed there in chapter 19. They didn't want to hear those words. But he says now, see that you do not refuse him who speaks. For if they did not escape who refused him who spoke on earth, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven. This is a scarier place. But with someone like Moses, Moses was afraid on Mount Sinai at the base, but Moses went up and spoke to God. Okay? There's also this shadow, this example, that the righteous, the Christian, the follower of Christ, the member of the church, recognizing this as a holy place, dealing with it in reverence, completely with reverence, and recognizing this is a scary place, but still approachable. Because Christ has made it approachable. He's made it approachable. Just like Moses could go up on Mount Sinai, so we can also approach this mountain, which is a greater mountain. Now, we have run out of time this morning, and I appreciate everybody being with us today, and hopefully we will continue next week. Thank you.